everyone. I'm Miss T. Welcome to today's grammar lesson. In today's grammar lesson, it's just a small overview of the simple tenses. The simple tenses are the present simple tense, the future simple tense, and the past simple tense. So we're going to talk about what these tenses are, some of the grammar rules related to them, and we're going to think about in what situations we use them and why they're different. All right, so what are the simple tenses? Altogether, English has 12 verb tenses. It is so much. The simple verb tenses are present simple, past simple, and future simple. Why do we use them? These tenses are usually the first ones that people learn when they start to learn English. They are the most basic tenses that you can learn, and they're also really important for getting a variety of messages. In most cases, these tenses are used to talk about facts and routines, but they tell us a little bit more depending on which verb tense you use. And one really important thing that it tells us is time, what time actions are happening. So these tenses really change the verbs that we're working with in a sentence, just like any tense in English. And they tell us when an action is happening in the past, present, or future just by the words that are used or the form of the verb that is used. So we're going to look at the basic difference between these tenses. We have the simple present tense, the simple past tense, and the simple future tense. So knowing the different verb tenses is really important. This is because verbs, which are action words, for example, I walk to the store, walk is the action, walk is a verb. These action words or verbs can tell us when an action is happening. How does it do this? The verbs, it takes different forms. So depending on when and the time the action happened, the verb is going to look different. So if the action happened in the past, the verb will look different compared to if the action takes place in the present or future. And in this video, we're going to briefly go over how those differences look and what we can look for and how we can apply those differences. So what we're saying makes sense. So the form of the verbs. Every verb has a base form. This is also known as the root form. The base form or root form of the verb is the form it takes when it hasn't been changed in any way. This is usually the form of the word that we see in the dictionary. So if you go in the dictionary and you look up the word walk, then it's going to say walk. It's not going to give you any other different format of the word. It's just going to be W-A-L-K, and then it's going to tell you that it's a verb, and that's it. It doesn't tell you all the different verb forms. And when you study English, this form is often called V1. Some teachers just call it base form. I typically call it base form, but a lot of teachers will call it V1 as well, or if you look at grammar notes, you might see it referred to as V1. And we're going to look at just this list of verbs in the base form. So like I said before, verbs are action words. So all of these that we see here, these are all action words. And they're all verbs. So we see the word like. No changes, no different forms, just in its base form. Love. Again, no changes or different forms. Talk. No changes or different forms. Jump. Study. Walk. So all of these are verbs in V1 or base form. So about the present simple tense. Sometimes we hear simple present, other times you might hear present simple. That depends on your teacher, and some teachers use both, Why? Because they mean the exact same thing. It's no different. Present simple, simple present, same thing. This verb form is used to talk about actions that are happening now in the present. That's why it's called present simple. And they're also used for actions that happen regularly. So we really use this really commonly for facts and routines. So when I say I drink coffee every day, my verb drink always stays in the V1 form because I do this every day. It is my routine. It is my habit. It happens regularly. In present simple form, the verb usually doesn't change. It usually stays in its base form, like my example. I drink coffee every day. When I say I drink coffee every day, then drink, that's my V1 form, that's my base form. However, there's exceptions. In English, we have a lot of exceptions to grammar. It stays in its base form in all cases except this following thing. So I'm going to ask you to look and really, really pay attention to this part here. When the subject is third person singular, so for example, she, he, it, we change the verb form by adding an S to the end. Everything else stays the same, except we just add an S. There are some tricky cases where spelling changes, but don't worry about that right now. Many cases, we just add S. So, subject, third person singular. So it could mean she, he, it, or just a singular person or thing. So other examples of singular people or things, we could say Miss T. We could say the teacher. We could say the dog. We could say the table. These are all third person, and they're all singular. I'm talking about Miss T. There's only one Miss T. The teacher, only one Miss Teacher that I'm talking about. The dog, only one dog. The table, there's only one table. And although our subject pronoun might change, so Miss T could be she. The teacher, maybe it could be he, maybe it could be she. The dog, we can say it. The table, we can say it. No matter what, if we simplify it and give it a subject pronoun, it can be any of these subject pronouns. So if you want to test if we should be using this rule in this form, just think, okay, even though it says the dog, can it be reduced to this subject pronoun? And why do we use subject pronouns? In my last video, I said it's because we're lazy. So if it can be reduced, if I'm feeling lazy and don't want to say the dog, I can say it. And that is when we can use this rule. So is it correct to say the dog love treats? No, that's not correct. Why? Because third person singular. So what should I do? I should put a big X here because this is incorrect. And what I'm going to do instead is say the dog loves treats. And now I have added my S onto my verb. Otherwise, the verb doesn't change, just adds an S to the end, and now it's perfect. And I am happy because my grammar is perfect and my sentence makes perfect sense. So the sentence that I just gave you and a lot of the other sentences that we'll go over here follow this basic structure, SVO. And you'll see English teachers use this structure. You'll see this in grammar notes. You will see this, it's applied all the time. SVO means subject, verb, object. Now let's look at some of these example sentences that follow the SVO structure. We have, I like pizza. You love dogs. They talk to students. We study English. Now, we notice that every single verb, like, love, talk, study, all of these verbs are completely unchanged. They're in their V1 form. They are not changed at all. This is very good. And why? Because does this say he, she, it? No, it says I. So then we really don't have to change anything. You, not he, she, it, says you, so we don't change anything. They, well, it's not he, she, or it's they, so we don't change anything. We, the same thing. It's not third person singular, so we do not change this. She, is she third person singular? Yes. She is the subject pronoun showing that the sentence is in third person singular. What does that mean? She walks to school. Walks. It's not only going to be the verb walk, but we're going to add that S on the end because that's the rule. If this rule is confusing or hard for you to remember, you really should practice it because even if somebody's very good at English, if you do forget this, this is a very basic element and it not only causes confusion, but it is also a barrier to people thinking that you're fluent. So really, really make sure that you feel good about this rule. Now, past simple. Sometimes we hear simple past and other times we hear past simple. Just like before, it's the same thing, depends on the teacher, whatever the teacher wants. This verb form is used to talk about the actions that happen in the past and are finished. So let's talk about the verb form in past simple. In past simple form, the verb form for regular verbs adds ed on the end. If the verb ends with E, you only add D. This verb form is commonly called V2. So you might hear English teachers or see grammar notes call this verb form V2. And this is the simple past form of the verb. So let's talk about regular verbs and irregular verbs for a minute because this can get quite tricky with this form of sentences, past simple, this tense. Regular verbs are action words. We know this, but the words or the verbs themselves, they always follow the same conjugation rules. Now, if you are somebody who has conjugation in your first language, which many languages do have this, then you don't need to worry about it. You know what it is. However, if you're not sure about the word conjugation or you have a completely different word in your first language for this, it's the process of changing verb forms. So when you change the form of the verb, we call it conjugating the verb, or the process is conjugation. Now, regular verbs will always follow the same rules. When it doesn't follow that rule, that makes it an irregular verb. Irregular verbs don't follow the normal rules, and we have to memorize their V2 forms. And there is even more forms that we have to memorize, and it's a big headache, but it's necessary for learning English. So, example sentences in the past simple. We will follow this basic structure, SVO, subject, verb, object, just like we said before. Now, all of the verbs here, they are past tense, they're in V2 form, and they're all regular verbs, so they're all going to follow the same rule. So instead of saying, I like pizza, now we're making it past, we're going to add a D, only a D, because it already ends in E, so we just need to add a D. If you add ed on this, you say I licked pizza. That's not correct. Don't do that. So if it ends in E, then you just have to add D and it's perfect like that, okay? Same thing when you use love. You loved dogs. Now, this means that the person who we're talking to loved dogs in the past. They started to love dogs in the past and they finished loving dogs in the past. And that is a complete action that has been completed already in the past. And so that's why we're using this. Now, this person doesn't love dogs anymore, and I don't love or like pizza anymore. Here, they talked to students. We studied English. She walked to school. All of these, we're just adding ed if it ends in the K, or just D if it ends in E. However, because English is not easy, when we have a Y, we take away the Y. So we originally had study. When we have a Y at the end here, and we want to make it ED, well, we have to actually remove this Y and add IED instead, just because English is not confusing enough. So we must add more rules to make it more confusing. And so no matter all of this, whether the subject resembles first person, third person singular, plural, whatever, doesn't matter because it all follows the same rule anyways. So remember before with simple present, we had to change the verb form and add an S on the end if it's third person singular. Well, now we don't have to worry about that anymore. So that's nice. And for that reason, I generally find that this tense, past simple tense, is a little bit easier. I see less errors when people talk in the past simple tense. Now let's talk about future simple. Sometimes we hear simple future, and other times you might hear future simple. Again, these are the same thing. This verb form is used to talk about the actions that will happen in the future, of course. So have not happened yet, but are planned for the future. In future simple form, the verb form will be like this. We have what we call an auxiliary verb, which is a really fancy word for helping verb. So I can write that down here if you'd like. Will is an example of an auxiliary verb, which is a helping verb. Okay. And so we have will, and then the base form of the verb follows. So future simple always follows the structure. The subject doesn't impact the form of the verb like before. Regular and irregular verbs follow the structure in the same way. So we don't have to memorize, oh, regular is like this, irregular is like this. So this might actually be the easiest one. Forget what I said about the simple past being easy. This is even easier in this form. So it actually progressively gets a little bit easier. So always, no matter what the verb is, you don't need to memorize all the different forms that it takes, or irregular, regular. You always just put will plus base form of the verb. And if you don't know what it is or how to spell it, you look it up in the dictionary. And like we looked at the beginning of this video, the base form is going to be the word or the verb the exact way that you find it in the dictionary. And the subject never changes it, nothing like that. It is quite easy. So now let's have a look at what that means. We see these sentences. Again, we're going to follow the SVO structure. I will like pizza. You will love dogs. They will talk to students. We will study English. She will walk to school. In all cases, we have the auxiliary verb, will, plus the base form of the verb, not changed at all, not in any way. Auxiliary, base form. Auxiliary, base form. Auxiliary, base form. Now, it always must be in this order. You must have will first and the base form after. If you switch the order of this, it will say, I like will pizza. Nope, that does not make sense at all. And that will show your IELTS examiner or any other, your PTE examiner, anything like that, CELPIP, whatever you're taking that maybe you don't know English very well, maybe you need to study a little bit more before you get your proficiency score. So make sure that you follow this exact word order. It is very important. But luckily for this, your subject doesn't change it. You don't need to memorize different forms of the verb itself. So that's all good. So in summary, simple present tense used to talk about actions happening now or actions that happen regularly. The verb is in V1 form or base form, except for when the verb follows third person singular subject. Simple past tense is used to talk about actions that happened in the past and are finished, started, finished in a past time, a time before now in this moment. The verb for this is called V2 form, except for when the verb used is irregular. Then it gets complicated. We didn't look at that today. There will be a video in the future that talks more about irregular verbs, but just know there's a lot of memorization that comes with that. Simple future tense. We use simple future tense to talk about actions that will happen in the future. The verb is presented in the structure will, which is an auxiliary verb or a helping verb, plus the base form of the verb that you are using, which is otherwise known as V1. This structure is always followed, no matter what. So maybe this one is the easy one. The other ones have little rules that you have to remember, but this one, it's just the same thing every time. So let's try to identify the tenses of the following sentences. What do you think? I love pasta. What is the tense? Look at the form of the verb. Identify the verb. The verb is love. So identify that and think, is it in the simple past, simple present, or simple future? What is the tense? It's simple present. So if you said simple present, you are correct. Good job. This one, she walked to the store. This one is a little bit longer. It has more words. But let's identify the verb. The verb is walk. Now, what form does this take? And so we have ed at the end. We have this rule y. We have this rule when we are talking about what tense? The simple past. So walk is our verb. We add ed, walked to the store, simple past. That is our correct answer. Another example sentence. She will plant flowers. She will plant flowers. So what is our verb? Plant. That is our verb. It is in the base form, but we have an auxiliary verb, will, right before it. She will plant flowers. So what does that mean? When do we use will? For simple future. So simple future is the correct answer there. So did you get them all? Hopefully you did. I recommend that you practice and review this video if you want to improve your English skills. I will be posting more grammar videos as often as I can for you to improve your English. Thanks so much for watching. Keep practicing and do the best you can. I'll see you next time. Bye.